Hi guys, Matt here from the Traveling Together Journal, bringing you an update on my camper build.
In previous videos, I built the subframe out of rectangular steel tubing and the camper floor out of wood, pour foam, and fiberglass, and got the floor mounted onto the subframe. Now it's time to build some walls. The external walls consist of 5mm plywood and a 1x2 Douglas fir frame. I used pocket screws and exterior grade wood glue to join the pieces of the frame, and more wood glue to attach the frame to the plywood. The frame spaces the plywood apart, creating voids that I will fill with foam. When we look back at the frame, you can see that this wall will have 3 voids to fill. I used a bunch of scrap material to support the thin plywood so that it wouldn't bow out while the foam expanded, and then with the wall in a vertical position, I mixed and poured the foam to fill the voids. It was a bit colder than recommended to use the pour foam, so I had a space heater warming the bottles and tried to heat up the voids before each pour. The foam seemed to have good expansion, so I guess it worked. With all the voids filled, I trimmed off the excess foam and sanded it down flush. Then used a router with a 1-inch radius bit to round off the corners that will be the front edges of the camper wall. Next came the fiberglass. I used 6-ounce cloth and epoxy resin to cover both sides of the panel. Once the epoxy cured, I drilled out pockets in each of the 4 vertical frame members so that I could screw the wall to the floor once I got it in place. With the subframe floor assembly pulled out away from the truck cab for better access, and lots of scrap material staged to help me keep the wall vertical, I used an epoxy paste and 4 pocket screws to attach the wall to the floor. Once the epoxy paste cured, I could remove the clamps and glass the seam. I started with a chopped glass epoxy mix to fill the joint. This will add strength and create a radius that the fiberglass cloth can easily conform to, so I'm not trying to shove the cloth into a 90-degree corner. I used 2 layers of 6-ounce cloth, the first being narrower than the second. This lets me cover the edges of the first layer, giving me a tapered thickness and fewer exposed edges to sand. The outside seam also gets 2 layers of 6-ounce cloth, and we've officially attached our first wall. The rear walls were built and attached using the same process. I used 2 separate panels for the rear so that a gap could be left for the door. The passenger side wall was also built using the same process. It had the added difficulty of accommodating the wheel well, but the benefit of having the rear wall to hold it vertical while I did the seam work. The seam between the passenger side wall and the rear wall also got the chopped glass paste, followed by 2 layers of 6-ounce cloth inside and out. Now we're ready to move on to the internal walls. These are constructed of a single layer of 5mm plywood and minimal amounts of 1x2 framing, with 6-ounce fiberglass and epoxy on both sides. They are attached to the structure with pocket screws, and all seams got the same treatment of chopped strand paste and 2 layers of 6-ounce cloth on both sides of every seam. It was a lot of seam work, but it is what will seal all the wood and hopefully create a strong, lasting camper. Speaking of which, it's starting to feel like an actual camper. Standing in the middle of the camper looking back at the door, to the passenger side will be our toilet. Here will be our refrigerator and battery bank. This will be storage accessible from the outside. The center will have storage accessible from the inside, and the entire driver's side will be storage accessible from the outside and our kitchen counter on the inside. It's pretty exciting to see it taking shape. Join me next time as I get to work on the cab over and the inner pop-up walls.